Once upon a time. Are we ever too old to hear a story? Stories are powerful. They draw us in. They say what statistics cannot. Once we're told a story, somebody can't say to you, just forget it, and wipe it right out of your mind. One day I'm driving down the street listening to the radio, and it's a debate on NPR. They're talking about the rights of the mentally challenged for the death penalty. They're arguing back and forth, and I'm just ready to turn the channel when suddenly the lady says, "Let me tell you a story," and everything stops. At our facility, a man had just finished eating his last meal. And then he picked up the dessert, and he held it up to the guard and said, "Do you have some saran wrap for this? I just want to save it for tomorrow. I'd love to eat it, but I'm too full." End of story. Stories remind us of what it is that we value. They connect us to our values. And for 25 years, I've collected stories from healthcare and tried to explain them. And I'd like to share with you where my story began. One day in 1991, my husband came into the kitchen, poured himself a cup of coffee, and said, "I'm leaving you. And I'm leaving on a 6 p.m. flight." That ended 2 years of marriage counseling. Not even 2 days later, I walked into my job at a telephone answering service, and there's my boss with mascara running down her face. And I said, "What's the matter?" And she said, "I'm so sorry. You don't have a job anymore. I can't even pay you for the days that you worked last week." And so I went to my desk to clean up my things, and that's when a regular customer came over. He said, "What's wrong?" And I said, "My worst fear came true." "What's that?" "I'm going to be the single mother of 5 children under the age of 11, and I'm living 3,000 miles away from my nearest relative." And immediately he reached into his back pocket, took out a checkbook, and wrote a check to a guy named Miles and shoved it into my hand, saying, "You're going to need a good attorney." And I thought to myself, just like a man, to be practical. I tried to give it back to him, but he refused. And so I put it in my jeans. Not even 2 weeks later, I'm driving home. It's August, and I can't believe my eyes. As soon as I come up the drive, a 100-foot pine tree has fallen on my house. And something bothers me worse than that. It's something white on the front door, a foreclosure notice from the bank. I still remember, standing in the middle of the street looking to the left and the right for the locusts, because it was the end of my world. Eventually, things weren't going to change, so I took that check and I went down to the lawyer's office, and he bellowed, "Come in." When I entered, he said, "How are you going to take care of those 5 kids Bob says you have?" And I said, "I don't know." "Do you like nursing?" And I said, "Nursing?" And immediately he reached under the desk, took out a worn leather Bible, and put the Bible on the corner of his desk, saying, "I'll tell you what, if you put your hand on this Bible and swear to me that you'll become a nurse, I'll do that whole divorce for that check that Bob gave you." And I know a deal when I see one, so I put my hand on that Bible. But I wasn't quite sure what nursing was. I had a general idea. And when I graduated, I have to tell you, I cried through the entire graduation ceremony. They weren't tears of joy. They were just tears of relief that the hardest thing that I'd ever done in my entire life was finally over. What is nursing? I wasn't prepared. Nobody told me during school that you will save lives. I will save lives? And when I started working as a nurse on the floor, I couldn't believe all the opportunities that I had to do that. To call a doctor and to tell him about a patient's deteriorating condition, because you see, nurses have 3 things that our physician partners can't possibly have and will never have. I have time with the patient over 8 or 12 hours to monitor their condition. I have the information about your practices. I know how you do things, so when you forget to order the antibiotic for a patient going to surgery, I can remind you. I can also see how different surgeons approach the same thing, the same illness or disease. And so I can give you this information, and all this information that I have helps patients. One day, a patient was discharged at 7 o'clock in the morning. but her ride couldn't come to 3 o'clock, and throughout the shift, her belly was tender and hurting, and I listened with my stethoscope, and by the time it was 2 o'clock, I called the doctor and said, look, I really want you to come up and see this patient. She shouldn't be discharged, and I told her of my assessment. She said, I'm too busy. I'm in the emergency room. I don't have time. You know, I can't, I'll be there when I can. And I said, no, I need something now. What do you want, she said. I need an x-ray, stat. And she said, okay, and have them call me the results. And that patient was in emergency surgery for a perforated bowel within 40 minutes. I had no idea it would require so many skills. One day, I'm washing an old man's back when suddenly he bursts into sobs. I jumped back. Did I hurt you? I said. No, he said gruffly. Go on. I gingerly gave him the tissues and returned to washing his back. After a minute of complete silence, he finally composed himself and softly whispered, I'm sorry. You see, my wife died 22 years ago, and, well, no one's ever touched my back since that day. And I thought to myself, wow, is this what nursing is? Too? What an honor. What an honor to be present at someone's life at that most vulnerable point. And so he told me what she planted in her garden and why she loved the rain, but it's absolutely nowhere in my charting. It was free. When I came into the nursing profession, I definitely saw the power differential between physicians and nurses. It was obvious. And I also knew that the patients didn't know that my relationship with a surgeon or a physician could save a patient's life because it would open the lines of communication. But what I didn't see was the relationships between nurses. One day I came to work and there was a crash cart next to a patient's room. The patient was found with a very low oxygenation level. The charge nurse filled me in. I took the pain machine and I brought it down to my office. She said that the patient was in the ICU now. Even on a full rebreather mask, she couldn't speak. I realized the problem. There was the wrong syringe in the machine, and it had delivered 10 times the amount of narcotics. Just then, the new nurse came into my office, and she took one look at the syringe and burst into sobs. But she mumbled something under her breath. It sounded like, I shouldn't have let them get to me. Immediately, we attended to the education and what went wrong. And then I finally got to ask her, what did you mean? What did you mean when you mumbled something under your breath? And she told me her story. I was 6 or 7 minutes late for the shift last night. When I came around the corner, there were a group of nurses talking. And as soon as they saw me, all the conversation stopped. I don't mean to be paranoid, but it didn't pick up again. I went into the ladies' room. I heard someone say, she'll never make a good nurse, will she? And somebody else's voice responded, she just doesn't have what it takes, does she? This is all my fault. I let those words destroy me. And no matter what I said to her, she did not stay on my unit. She transferred off the very first position available. And as the new manager of that unit, I knew I would never be able to keep the patients safe until I kept the nurses safe. And so I taught the nurses, and I shared with them this issue, and we came together. We came together, and the first thing that we did was we dismantled the hierarchy that separates us. One day, I'm talking to a group of ICU nurses, and I said, see this white piece of paper here? Imagine it's the nursing profession, and I draw a line on the bottom. What does the line represent? And somebody from the first row mumbled, rehab. I did another one, medical, surgical, everybody's answering, tele, L&D, labor and delivery, emergency room, operating room. What's at the top? Oh, they wouldn't answer me now. You are. What I found out was about the healthcare culture. In the healthcare culture, some people and some disciplines think they're more important than others. See, it doesn't matter if you can run 7 or 8 pumps, because if you're in a multi-injury accident and your brain is just mush and you can't remember how to walk or swallow or talk, what you really need is somebody who can stay with you for 7 or 8 months until you can talk again. and then we did the same thing on the floor. We realized there was a hierarchy on the floor. I did the same exercise, and I said, who's at the bottom? And the staff said, housekeeping. I was like, really? The lab, cafeteria workers, nursing assistants, nurses, doctors. And we came together with one resolve, and that was that we would treat every single solitary patient as if it was our own family member. And we wouldn't tolerate any negativity or rudeness because we knew that simply watching any kind of rude behavior on the unit significantly impaired our ability to think cognitively, and we dismantled this. One way we did it, one very brief exercise, was at a Christmas party. The physicians the year before had come into the party, and the nurses had gone to one side and the physicians had gone to another. But this year I met them at the door and with name tags, and I said to everyone, you write your first name, the nurses, really large on the badge. And to the doctors I said, just write one interesting thing about yourself. And they did. Tahiti, whale killer, I can remember lots of them still. But it was amazing when I opened the door to the party, because instead of us going to different herds or corners, everybody was engaged in talking. And I don't know how you could measure the next day. It was as if finally, instead of seeing each other as doctors and nurses, they saw each other as people, as individuals. And I knew immediately that the unit was safe. Why is there hostility? What is hostility? What is incivility? It's the overt and covert behaviors that we used to put people in their place as humans. I learned it the other day in the beauty shop when I took out my cell phone. Somebody went, oh. Somebody else went, and finally somebody asked me to please take my call outside. Women are very, very good, especially at the nonverbal, and especially in nursing. Nursing was found many years ago in a patriarchal society. In fact, I was talking to a nurse who had been a nurse for 47 years, and I said, do you remember your first day on the floor? And she said, oh yeah, I thought I had everything. I thought I was prepared. And then I get there, and the physician holds out his cigarette, and I had forgotten my matches. I said, are you kidding me? So 20 years ago, we were still standing back, putting our hands behind our back, and doing subtle things that made sure that we stayed in our place. Whenever there's a dominant group that has more power than an oppressed group, the dominant group exerts all its power downward. And because the oppressed group can't direct its power upward, they unconsciously start attacking each other. The next most interesting thing is that the oppressed group forgets what it values and starts valuing what the dominant group values. For example, what's the billing code for an elderly gentleman's grief? So what you do every day, the fact that I noticed that the order was written on the wrong chart and saved a patient from a horrible allergic reaction, when notified the doctor, etc., of a patient's condition, that I spent time with somebody who was incredibly worried about losing their arm and how that was going to affect their life, when all these things are free, like pennies on a convenience store counter, there for the taking, when they're not worth anything, when we don't charge for them. Nurses devalue them themselves because they must not be worth anything, because they don't cost anything, not in this current scenario. The next thing that I noticed is that we were self-silencing. I did a study of over 5,000 people, all in healthcare, nurses, doctors, administrators from all over the hospitals. If I could guarantee you in writing that the conversation would turn out just the way you want it, is there somebody that you would go and have a conversation with to create a healthy work environment? And all but 4 of them said, absolutely yes. And I asked them, why? Why aren't you talking to each other? I don't understand. And the answer was fear. And no matter what group I go to, it's the same answers. Fear of retaliation, fear of the reaction, fear of making the situation worse. No time, why bother? Nothing's going to change anyway. Or a fear of hurting somebody else's feelings. And so then I'll say, well, who's doing these things to you? And they go, uh-oh, we're doing those to each other. That's that unconscious lashing out, self-silencing. Why does that matter? Because every day the equivalent of 3 747s crash in the United States, and we don't see that in our culture. Over 1,000 people die from preventable medical errors. But in our culture, we do not see or acknowledge that. It doesn't make the news. I guess it's not sparkly enough. It's not the number one thing on every television station, etc. And so researchers studied, why do people self-silence? And what they found out is they really value the relationship with each other more than anything else. And where these responses came from is that one day they decided to leave the school of fish and have a conversation with somebody, and then, oops, retaliation, we'll give you a bad assignment, or if I'm a physician, you won't get any referrals from me anymore. And they got right back into the school of fish. In order to keep our patients safe, we need to be able to communicate. And if you have a hierarchy, those communication lines are blocked. And so we told, and I worked very hard on our unit, we told everybody that they were important, that they had value, and everybody knew it and felt it. So it was no surprise that 6 months later, Anna, our housekeeper, would save a patient's life. She was sweeping the floor one morning. Everybody else was in report, the doctors hadn't arrived yet, and she heard a thumping sound, just a thumping sound. But because she was so important, because everyone called her by name, she thought, I better check that out, and she opened the door to see a patient in a hard cervical collar with crackers dripping out of down their collar. Their hands were flailing on the bed. That was the thumping sound. They had already turned blue, and the call light was under the bed on the floor, and Anna saved a patient's life. 6 months later, the nursing assistant, Rahima, saved another patient's life. We were wheeling a bilateral knee patient in from surgery into a room when suddenly Rahima said, stop. And everybody paused. And she pointed out that the room had not been cleaned and that we were putting this patient into a MRSA-infected room. You see, the only way to keep our patients safe is to dismantle the hierarchy, where some people feel like they're worth or better than or more better than others. And until every person realizes that they have value, then nothing changes. What can we learn from this phenomena that is really only a microcosm of what happens in society? I fly a lot. And inevitably, after I've ordered the glass of wine, you'll hear, if there's a nurse or a physician on board, will you please ring your call light? And we all wait to see who rings it first, hoping somebody else does, right? When we're on the plane, there is no hierarchy. It doesn't matter if you're in first class, we're at our best, or coach. It doesn't matter what you do for a living, how much money you have, or if you can pay for it. You know, on a plane, we all come together. We all come together to do what's right for the person who needs us in this metal tube that's in the sky. What if we carried that belief from the airplane into our communities, into our organizations and our businesses? You know, what if we really formed a team? We knew that everybody had value, that everybody has the right to be well. You know, we would save lives. Maybe yours. Thank you.